Okay, so I woke up this morning and was thinking about some interesting family dynamic stuff, particularly around my brother. And what I was thinking about was that, okay, my family has said all sorts of shit about how um, they want to call him like pussy whipped and whatnot because he listens to his wife and values what she has to say. And the biggest thing that I was thinking about it this morning was the reason they have a problem with it is essentially because we were raised to have this ridiculous commitment, devotion to the family. We were not raised to have our own lives, right? We were raised specifically for the older generations to suck the life out of us. And that was our sole purpose. So, he went and joined the Air Force, which was fine. That was a good thing that he did, according to the family, because, that's one of those noble things you can do, right? Join the military and whatnot. So he joined the Air Force and was in for 4 years. And then when he got out, he met his wife while he was still in. And so I don't remember if he was out before they got married or not. I don't know his timeline, y'all. I just don't. There was a span of time where we weren't talking as much because he was in the military and I was in undergrad, so we were preoccupied with other stuff, and the cell phones that we had back then weren't as conducive as they are now to talking anytime about anything. So yeah, but I was thinking about that point with especially the family. It's like the names that they've called him because he's chosen to have this life with his wife and chosen to try to have some kind of partnership, right? But the family ultimately sees it as a bad thing because it's taking him away. It's taking him away from the family, right? So, and he finally left the state recently and moved his wife and daughter out to Oklahoma. And, of course, the family's not okay with that. And I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's like, that's literally, it's like where I'm coming from the standpoint of we were never meant to have our own lives, right? Even when I was married and in Alabama, there was a big chunk of time where I stopped talking to my family because I couldn't differentiate on what was me having a problem with my ex versus them yelling at me all the time or talking at me about, how terrible of a person he was. And, so I would get into these positions where I would recognize that I had a problem with how he was treating me or things he was doing or saying in general. And I could keep track of them for so long. But then in the times that I tried to leave, because it was more than once, the two biggest ones at the end, I think, were the more obvious. But like when we were like living within 15 minutes of my family, I was spending a lot of time at my parents' house. I mean, namely because we had Ziva, and, she was 3 months old when we got her in April 2013. And I was relying on the other dogs to help me train her. Was essentially the big thing on that, right? So she was like the easiest dog I've ever had to housebreak because there were 4 other dogs that were, well, 3 of them were housebroken and my mom likes to say that she and Doogie had an agreement that as long as he peed on the rug and she could clean it up. She had like these 2 different rugs that she would put on this one section of tile floor by the closet, because for some reason he was always very insistent on peeing on that spot. So she would have one rug there to keep it from going in the closet, and then when he did it a couple times on that one, she'd switch them out and just kind of rotate and keep washing them. So yeah, like aside from that, they were very housebroken and very well trained and taught Ziva a lot. Like the pack dynamics was excellent, right? So I had her around them a lot. In that span of time, I wasn't in a good spot to make any kind of decisions about what was going on. Like this is also keeping in mind that I got my TBI in May 2013. It became very difficult to keep track of what was going on and what was actually happening versus, all the gaslighting that I was going through. And like sorry, I had an ad pop up. But like the biggest thing with that was I was having a hard time remembering things in and of myself, right? And then my ex kind of took it and ran with it, and like every chance he got to fuck with me, he absolutely was, right? So like all sorts of, there was dumb shit that was happening too, but like at one point, I think something got set on top of the light bill, and I thought I had paid it. And then we come home one night, and there's no power, because it turns out I hadn't paid it, but I completely forgot about it because there was a stack of things on the counter that I just, it wasn't registering there anymore. There were many times that I would have the sink on in the kitchen and walk away from it for a minute, and then like 10 minutes later realize the sink's still running. And it's like just little things like that it's like, okay, so maybe that's not really that big of a deal, and it really shouldn't have been, although there was one time that the pipes kind of got froze over and like the sink was backing up. But that, like, it was like mostly just little stupid shit that shouldn't have been that big of a deal. And like, okay, the deal with the lights, it sucked, but it's not like it was something that wasn't easily remedied, but because it was one of those things where I just was this big failure, it became something where he started to increasingly hound me about the shit that I was screwing up on, right? Or that I was forgetting to do. It's like, I've mentioned on here several times too that like when I first got the TBI, him and my grandma both, they were convinced that since I didn't actually hit my head, that I couldn't have done any damage. That is not true. So when I fell, I like cracked my teeth together really hard, and that like I cracked my teeth together so hard that I thought I broke my jaw for a couple weeks. I never really got it checked, but eventually it didn't hurt near as bad as it did, so I didn't really give it much thought beyond that. However, still did damage, right? And my grandma was like the first one that said, oh, she couldn't have done anything because she didn't hit her head, and my ex was going along right along with that idea, and so I was stubborn and did not try to take the time to heal because they didn't seem to think I had anything or had any kind of, I should have any issues. I should just be normal, right? So, however, me living in this state of knowing that I fucked myself up and not really knowing the full extent of how much I did or didn't do, I didn't take any time to heal. And that's like one of the biggest things. As soon as I did it, I sent my line leader and the guard a message, and I was like, I just fucked myself up. And he's like, what'd you do? And I said, I just fell at home on the stairs. And I said, I didn't lose consciousness. I said, but I saw stars. And he said, did you puke? And I said, no. He said, if you puke, go to the ER. So he said, like, hands down, puke, ER. But it's like, I was like, well, I wasn't puking. When I was up and moving, because I was trying to get a bag together to go and stay over at my parents' house because my mom had knee surgery and they were going to be at the hospital for 4 days. So I was just going to take Ziva over there and stay with their dogs. You know, it's a lot easier when there's a freaking dog door and all that fun stuff. But when I was, of course, I was continuing my packing and going back and forth, just walking like I walk, normal walking, I started getting nauseous. It's like, okay, gonna have to sit down. This is not good. So I did that. But yeah, my line leader was just like, if you puke, go to the ER. It's like, well, I'm not puking. So I surely I'll be fine, right? And, I think my husband at that time was already like, yeah, whatever, you can't do anything. But it was very clear to me when I was driving to my parents' house, it was like a 12-minute drive. So it wasn't that far. And I always took back roads. And by the time I got to the main road that I was going to turn on, to turn to the next main road, after all, I went as far on the back roads as I could to the route that I normally took didn't have a through way, so I had to turn at that point. But, I was kind of jumping off other spots wherever I could. But anyway, when I got to that point where it's this three-way stop, well, it wasn't a three-way stop. It was a three-way, and my way was stopped, but the other way was still going. I was sitting there and just like watching the traffic go. It was really trippy, and it's like, I don't even know how to explain it. But it was really hard to really know what was happening. Like, I could see the cars coming, but like my depth perception, I'm not going to say my depth perception has ever been especially stellar, but I feel like it should maybe not have been that bad, but it was at that point in time, and I was just like very aware that it's like, oh, I should not be driving right now, right? But again, because my ex and my grandma said you couldn't have done anything, so like, fuck it, we're gonna just power through anyway, right? So that was the thing. It was me powering through. Like at one point, it was like a year later, I was back at working at the group home because, when I got my TBI, okay, the negative synchronicities just started happening after I got married because because that was not where while it was where I was meant to be at that point in time, that was definitely not where I was meant to be forever by any means. I've talked on here a lot about the whole deal with the wedding and how I went to my seminary entrance interview the day of my wedding to avoid spending time with myself, because I knew if I sat with myself, I would not be able to go through with it. And I felt like, so I was like 28, so I'm approaching 30, that's the burden to the family time frame, right? So this whole mindset, so I was kind of pushing because that was what I was raised to believe, was that if it takes you forever to get married and you fall into that spinster kind of category, then you're just being a burden to your family, right? And so, of course, I didn't let myself spend time thinking on my wedding day because I wouldn't have been able to go through with it. And so I got into that situation. Going back to the negative synchronicities, one of the first things that had happened. Now, okay, I had left my job at the group home a while beforehand, just because when I got out of basic training, I was very temperamental. I tend to be temperamental anyway, but it was like a really heightened thing, and there was this one client at the group home that he was especially a dick, and he set in on me one day because I had just gotten back from basic training, and he was just being a dick as much as he possibly could be. I don't know if it was he just didn't like the military or the idea of women in the military. I don't know fully what his deal was with it, but he was being a dick. And I got to a point with him, like I was working night shift and I had to get the clients up and get them their meds first thing in the morning, right? Because their meds were locked up in the office, so they had to come down, get their meds, go have breakfast, all that fun stuff. And he was just being a pain in the ass and mocking me very hard when he finally got his ass in there. And I got to the point, like, because it was like the last probably 45 minutes of my shift, and he was being as difficult as he was. And I got to the point where when I left, I really wanted to deck him. It's like, I cannot really foresee me making it out of this place without decking him if I have to always deal with him every day working here. So, for safety's sake, I figured it was best if I didn't continue that job after I got out of my basic training stuff for a while, right? And so, I dropped it. Because I didn't want to deck that guy. I didn't want to have some sort of assault charge or something that I had to worry about because he was being a dick and I was like at the end of my rope on that end and couldn't contain the anger as much as I had been able to previously, I guess. So I left that job, right? And so there was a span of time that I was working. This is a stupid one. I was working at a fucking call center. Me, who's never liked talking and using my voice, right? That's been one of my biggest struggles. That's one of the things that I've talked about on here a lot. The struggle of me getting over my fear of using my voice. Yeah, I worked at a call center for a while. Knew it wasn't going to be a long-term thing. Hated it. For various reasons, shouldn't have been there anyway, right? Just, the standpoint of absolutely hated that job, but was doing it because at least it, gave me money, paid a couple bills. So that was the job that I had when I started seminary. Started seminary in January. In March was actually Easter weekend. My ex and I were signing the lease on this rental house. That's like the one that was like 12 minutes from my parents' house. This is about the same from his parents' house too, because they don't live. They're like about a 10-minute drive from over here too. But yeah, so it worked out for the time. But we signed the lease on the house. My phone rings. I ignore it because the landlords are here and we're talking, right? And as soon as they leave, I deal with my phone. And I see I have gotten a call from the temp agency. And it is a call that I have lost my job, right? I had to call her back, and I called her back, and that was what it was. That my job was no longer available, which, like I said, was not breaking my heart at all. I hated that job. But I still did it for some damn reason. I think it was just because it was the first thing I could find after I left the group home in a hurry because I didn't want to deck the guy. So at that point, since we just signed the lease on the house, it's like, all right, look, I will just max my student loan up for the semester and use that to help pay bills. And then as soon as the semester's over, I will focus full time on getting a job until I get a job, right? But then semester ends May 8th. May 14th, I fall and break my brain. I had a job interview like a couple days after I fell, and I'm pretty confident the guy it was like a waitressing job. I'm pretty sure that guy thought I was drunk because I was not fully coherent. Just like my brain wasn't functioning right, y'all. I broke it. Again, didn't realize how badly I broke it at that point in time, but yeah. So, okay, but why did I go there? This is so obnoxious. Going back to the gaslighting piece, right? So, it was like, because I was flaky as hell, my ex was enjoying screwing with me, right? And there was a span of time where, okay, my best friend, who was like my best friend for 15 years before I stopped talking to her in 2020 after she told me that she didn't trust my judgment. And it's like, that's not coming with me into the next phase of my life. People who discourage me from trusting myself. But anyway, at the point that I was married and in this situation, she was still my best friend, and her fiance, I don't like him at all. And I have no problem saying I did not like him at all. I'm pretty confident that if I was still around him at all, I would still say that. He was just not... We just didn't like each other. For whatever reason. I have some theories now, but... he had this job. I think he was delivering car parts or something to different businesses. And he ended up working with my ex's... He always called him his best friend, but he never had a single nice thing to say about that guy. So... And I think it's more because my ex wasn't somebody that people liked, right? So the fact that this guy kept talking with him was the reason that they were best friends, or that he was his best friend. But he's, after my ex and I got married, after I got my TBI, which was like 6 months after we got married, then his buddy ends up working with my best friend's fiance. And my ex his friends started coming over a lot. And, my ex was always kind of making fun of him. It's like, I don't even know what he wants. He said he usually just shows up when he wants something, and then he'll start coming over for a while again, and then he just disappears somewhere along the line again. Well, the best friend coming over was useful for coming up with all sorts of stories about me, honestly. So the friend's fiance, who didn't like me, and the husband's friend, who didn't really know me, but wasn't really seeing me at my best anyway, because after I got my TBI, then it's like all hell broke loose, and like I felt crazy all the time, and, you know, my ex is telling me things and then denying it, so it's like actual gaslighting all the time, you know, and then those two start working together, and then my ex starts telling me about, like, he's building up this story about how they talk about me all the time whenever, you know, when they cross paths at work, I'm the topic of conversation, and, you know, how crazy I am and all this stupid shit. And at that point in time, I went along with it. I don't know at this point in time how much of it was true. I have no problem believing that, you know, with the one guy not liking me, that they could have been talking shit about me. To the extent that my ex was building it up to be, I don't know. But he started in on that, so it made me resent his friend that much more, because, you know, he's coming over all the time on my days off. You know, I had like every other weekend that I had to work with the group home, and for some reason, every time I was off, it seemed like he was wanting to hang out. It's like, what the fuck? Right? So it's just kind of obnoxious. But then my ex starts telling me, you know, how crazy they're talking about me and making me out to be and all this stuff. And I bought it. And I don't, like I said, I absolutely have no problems believing that they probably did. I doubt that it was as much as my ex made it out to be. Because I don't know how much they even saw each other. It could have been a one-time thing. And yes, they mentioned me in passing, because that was the common link with dude's best friend and, you know, my best friend's fiance. But yeah. So gaslighting, that was the big thing, right? So, you know, and then add in the brain injury, which complicates the fuck out of everything that much more. But when it was, you know, like the times that I would try to sort of distance myself from my ex while still being okay, like when we were, the first time I thought about leaving, we were still in that place like 12 minutes away from here. But then, you know, he'd talk about how my family hated him, and I couldn't deny that because, I mean, they did. But at the same time, with good reason, you know, but I think the first time that I left, that it was really an obvious I'm leaving kind of a thing, was right after we got down to Alabama. He had taken a job down there, and then he ended up 2 months in Alabama, and then like 5 months in Germany, I think, for job training. And then we moved down to Alabama, right? So 2015, the end of the summer, we moved to Alabama. And I got a job I had 2 jobs. I had a job at Target, and I had a job at a daycare. And neither one of them paid for shit, right? So it was like $9 an hour, right? So like that was a big reason that my car payment, I wasn't making enough on my paychecks to cover the full car payment, and my ex absolutely refused to help me at all, even though I took out one of my, I emptied one of my retirement accounts to help us move to Alabama. I took out the full amount that I could on a student loan payment, or a student loan one semester, to fix the truck so it was something we could actually ride around in southern Alabama in, right? It was, starting out, it didn't have an AC, and I refused to take it to Alabama and drive around in it without an air conditioner. So that was one of the things that I, max out student loan so we can go ahead and get this stuff handled. And then he can't help me with I think it was less than $100 on a freaking car payment just to have the full amount at the time because, there was a span of time where I was unemployed when we got there. He had the job that took us down there. But, he had to take a temporary pay cut from where he was at up here for the move. But then it was just, he just absolutely couldn't do anything to help. And it was just like, cool. Worth mentioning, we did get bearded dragons that he wanted at that point in time, though. So, yeah. But anyway, so the first time I tried to leave once we were down there, it was packing all my shit up in my car and coming back when I still had my vibe, right? And I loved that damn car. It was the first thing that I really did by myself, for myself, right? My dad went with me when I was talking to the guy about, buying it, but he didn't say anything. And it was more just to have somebody else there and hope I didn't get screwed over ridiculously, which I kind of did. But at the same time, it was still something I did myself, right? So I went and talked to the guy and got the paperwork signed and all that stuff. All of that myself, right? So it was like the one thing that I had that I was really proud of. And then when he couldn't help me, I tried to work it out. I called my bank, the bank that I had the car loan through, and I talked to him about if I could make like a bunch of smaller payments, and he said that was fine. Now, me and my broken brain did not think about it not going to the payment amount. So I made a good 6 $200 payments twice monthly. So I had like 3 months where I was paying $200 every time I got my paychecks to go to this thing, and my payment was $297. And he said that I could do it. And I thought that would cover me, right? Because I didn't know that, or I didn't think about the stuff that I guess I needed to think about. It was one of those things, if you don't know what you don't know until you know it, right? So if you don't know that they're going to apply the smaller amount to the principal and not to your payment amount, because I was asking about the payment amount, yeah. Anyway, my car got repoed. And initially I thought about fighting it. But then, because like with all the brain damage shit, I got to a point where it's just like, it's not even worth it. Right? So, ooh, that's a wave. Still a sensitive spot, not gonna lie. Which is interesting because I processed through this on here before. I thought I had a lot more of this out of my system, but it was just like that wave of that idea of thinking that it wasn't worth it, right? Because that was the message ultimately that I kept receiving, that I wasn't worth the difficulty, right? And I kept, because just because of everything, like with my family, with my ex, it's like, I bought that shit. So when it came to the car, this thing, the one thing that I had that I was so proud of because I did it by myself, and then I got to a point where it wasn't worth it. But it obviously, it meant something, and so I clearly should have done something about, pushing for that, because when they said I hadn't made a payment in like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, it's like, I've made lots of little payments, and when I was working, or when I was playing roller derby, my first year in, there was a girl that was talking about having worked for, there's my hawk, I think it's a falcon. And it wasn't near as close that time, but yeah. Anyway, because I saw it, I was thinking about it the other day, and I got a video months ago that I had that shot of the falcon in it, because it's like, that's a big ass bird in the tree, right? Anyway, the derby friend said she had worked for a company that, did that kind of stuff, the tow truck stuff. So it's like, she was telling me what was like, what they could and couldn't do. It's like, I wish I would have known you back then. It's like, I didn't know that they couldn't just take it. I thought they were just, they came after it and there was nothing I could do about it. But yeah, anyway. So the first time I left, 2015, the stupid part was I waited until the day after our anniversary. So it had been our 3-year wedding anniversary, November 30th, 2015. Day after, December 1st, I was on the road back up to Indiana. And while he was at work, right? So I still had my car back then, so I was able to do that. And then, Ziva was with me. Obviously, that dog has always been mine. Even though he picked her out, he wanted the breed. And so, for various reasons, it was supposed to be his dog as far as he was concerned. But, yeah, that dog was mine, like from the get-go. But anyway, so when he gets back to the apartment, I'm not there, and I got a bunch of my shit is not there either. And he was freaking out. He was pissed, right? And I've talked about the shitty emails or shitty messages that he sent to his brother talking about me, like trash talking me, when I was putting his custody case stuff together. Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't, nothing about the situation was good. However, I had stopped talking to my family for a span of time and had been journaling to help me remember what it was that was leading me to leave. Now, when I ended up here, of course, my family's thrilled to death. And he's pissed. And once I get to around my family, and then they're trash talking him, and then I talk to him, and he's like, well, you had to go back because your family hates me, and blah, 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 and you can't do anything without your family, and all this shit. It's like, it was really a struggle because, he's talking this way, and even though I know that I stopped talking to my family for a span of time to make sure it was me making the decision, I couldn't tell him that he was wrong in my parents hating him, because they did, right? And with good reason. I should have sooner. I don't hate him. It's just I feel like that's a wasted energy. He gave me a lot to have to heal from. But at the same time, without that situation, I wouldn't have realized the toxicity with my family. So, yeah. Anyway, after we talked some and I couldn't really commit to having made the decision on my own anymore, I stayed for the entire 2016 spring semester with seminary. And that was because that was also the semester that I was graduating. So I did get a break from him. So there was that. But then after that was over, I moved back to Alabama. And not just moved back to Alabama, I moved back at that time where I'm getting all the shit out of the apartment and moving it over to the house that he just bought and all this stuff, right? So I wasn't around at all for the process of him purchasing the house. However, I did get to have the input of do not buy that house without a fence. So, he made him put up a fence before he got it. Because we had one dog at that time anyway, but we actually had a pit bull for a little while, which he did not need to have that kind of dog, period. I did not need that much dog with having my brain as jacked up as it was at that point in time. So, yeah, so that was too much dog. And I'm not going into the dog. I'm just not. She breaks my heart every time I think about her, because it's like, I feel like I let this dog down because I was not in a better space. But it's what it is. And so, so I go back down there and help him move all the shit out. Actually, I mainly moved the shit out of the apartment and into the house because he was working, right? And I had left my jobs, so I was able to do that, right? So I got to do the majority of the work, moving the shit from the apartment on the 3rd floor to the house across the bay. I don't remember how we did on the furniture, which the only furniture we had was queen bed and box springs and 2 recliners. Like, everything else was just little shit. But it's like, I can't do that stuff by myself. So, no. I don't remember what we did on that end. But yeah. So, then, so I was there, I think mid-June or the start of July. It was mid-June. Because I think the end of our lease was up on July 2nd, maybe? So from then until December 2017, I stayed there and tried to deal with him and all that stuff, right? And in that time, he got... Of course, I've talked on here several times, we got the kid for his spring break in 2017, so March. My ex's grandma died, and, then we got the kid, and we knew going into it that the only reason his kid's mom was letting us have him for spring break was because she was trying to do something. She was trying to come up with some sort of scenario so we wouldn't be able to see him again. And in May, that was proven because he got presented with a protective order, right? So when the protective order shows up, his former attorney quit, so I have to shift into, mind you, I'm still not working at this point in time because I was working at that time. I found a job with, what was it? I briefly had a job with doggy daycare. That had ended. The job that I loved ended because there was a glitch with scheduling and my brain connecting and putting all the information out there for, so when I'm getting hired onto the job, I didn't think to say, custody stuff can't work Christmas. Child stuff, I have to deal with that, right? So when Christmas was getting ready to roll around and somebody else was going to not be around, it was a big problem when I had to come up here for that shit. And that was when the kid's mom fired a gun in the house when she and her next ex, her second ex-husband, I think, now ex, they were still together at that time. That was a big part of the reason why he became her ex, was she went nuts and shot the gun in the house, and he had every reason to believe that she was intending to use it on him and claimed that, he was abusing her or whatever. Which I'm pretty confident that was in the legal paperwork that I got to deal with talking, because there was the thing with the pictures of, where the bullet holes were and all this stuff. So it's like, But anyway, because of that incident, her firing the gun in the house, we ended up having to come back up here sooner. And, it complicated things with the job. They loved me at the doggy daycare, and they didn't like it any more than I did. But then, after this whole thing comes up, then my ex, calls them to harass them about why they fired me with whatever, when he had this shit going on with coming up here, whatever. Anyways, a big hot mess. And I never spoke to him again, and I probably would have, because I really liked them and they really liked me. But once he got in the middle of it, they hung up on him, and that was the end of it. And it's like, at that point, it's like, I can't talk to them ever again now, right? Because what are they going to want to talk to me about when they know I'm married to a freaking psychopath? That's a pretty strong supporting thing of, leave that person alone, because you don't know what kind of stupid shit that dude's going to try to bring into your life, right? So yeah, anyway. So I do remember I was working at, it was something with disabled high school kids, helping them get job placement stuff. And it was at the hospital, because there were little things that they were able to do, like they could wash dishes in the kitchen for some job experience and that kind of stuff, or make copies for one of the departments or something, that kind of stuff. And that's where I was working when I had to shop for his attorney, right? So I'm looking for his attorney, and find him a new one that can put all the pieces in front of one single judge and handle his brother's situation as well, since he was getting falsely pulled into a whole bunch of shit that he never should have had. He never should have had to worry about it, but because his brother's a freaking douchebag. Yeah, he got a whole bunch of shit saddled on him that he never should have. So like I've said many times, that was one of those things. It's like, when I had that span, after the whole twin flame thing came up, and I kind of went into this little mourning phase of how much time I've wasted, right? How much time I wasted on my ex, for example. I got this really strong realization that I wasn't there for my ex. I was there for his brother and for his kid. And, at a time they needed me, the kid needed an example that just because his parents were shitbags doesn't mean he's forever doomed to be that too, right? That there are other ways to exist in the world. And then, my former brother-in-law, he was getting drug into stupid shit, getting accused of having done stuff to the child that he did not do, because he was the kid's favorite person. So she had to destroy that relationship in order to make the kid not want to be around him. So she was filing she was telling therapists, doctors, teachers, anybody who would listen, about how abused her kid was by his uncle, and he wasn't. And so, I've talked about on here, when I met my former brother-in-law, I made him speak to me, because he just at the time he was living in his parents' house, and he would go, as soon as he got home from work, he would go lock himself in the room, and play video games. And he would come out and he would like keep his eyes on the floor right ahead of him and not make eye contact, especially if I was there. And then one day I was just like, hey, I started talking to him directly, and he looked really uncomfortable because it's like, you will talk to me, right? This is stupid that you're just like walking through here and trying to act like I'm not in the room. So it's like, I knew when I met him that was kind of a dangerous situation. Just the fact that he was so focused on trying not to be seen. That was exactly what brought the attention of, his nephew's crazy ass mom onto him, right? So because he was trying not to be seen, he just wanted to do his own thing and not be a problem for anybody. So she, has to make him a problem, to destroy that connection with the kid. Anyway, how did I do that again? Okay, I know I was talking about leaving the ex. After I found the attorney, that job, the other job ended around December 2016. And that job ended May 2017, as soon as this semester was over. And that was kind of a mutual thing, too. Even though I think they technically wanted... the girl that I worked with, like, she and I both got let go at the same time. And I think it was, as much as anything, they were wanting to redo the program altogether and have it be kind of something different anyway. And she had been there for a while. But yeah, that job didn't hurt my feelings either. I didn't really like it. I liked the kids. I liked the people that I worked with because there were 2 other ladies. But I didn't like the job. But yeah, after that job ended, mind you, we get this protective order May 2017. A couple weeks later, I lose this job. And so I turn laser focus onto organizing everything for the stupid custody case that isn't even mine, for the sake of putting the truth out there and, bringing an end to her harassing my former brother-in-law and all this shit. Like, I spent 6 months, I think, just like combing through all of the stuff that we had in the house, for like the stuff that my ex's ex before me, his first ex-wife, that she had the time from when the kid was a baby, right? And then, because the baby mama didn't try to get my ex involved with paternity stuff, supposedly until right before the cutoff for, when she had to prove paternity. That was the story I was given. However, there was some evidence that I came across where she mentioned it, but he didn't believe her, and she didn't push it harder until closer to time, where she had said that, hey, you have a kid. And he didn't believe her because, he walked in on her. He came home to discover that she was having sex with somebody else, right? So it was like one of those situations. So he didn't believe it was his kid, and she didn't try to legally prove it until later. So, all the stuff for when the kid first came into his life and all the shit that the kid's mom was doing initially, the first ex-wife had to deal with that shit. So then when it came to me, I was organizing all the shit, like from what she had put together and then everything that I knew. And like, I found an app that, you can print off entire text conversations with different people. So, like the messages with my ex and the kid's mom, right? All those, right? The conversations with timestamps, like that was the bigger part, that they had actual timestamps on them, showing before the kids' spring break that, I had a conversation with my mom where I told her that we knew she was up to something. We didn't know what, but we wanted to spend time with the kid. The stuff about the grandma dying, right? Any of that. The stuff that returned to I knew my ex was talking shit about me anyway. But then, to actually see the evidence of what he was saying to his brother about me after I left that first time. Yeah, that was fun. But anyway, after, I spent, that was my job. I was spending hours upon hours organizing the legal shit and putting it into a space to get to the attorney. So the attorney had, I took a flash drive in, and it had all this shit from the conversations. It had, pictures with timestamps on it. Of course, since my ex's grandma had died and I said that his brother deserved to be able to go to his grandmother's funeral without having to worry about his nephew saying untrue shit about him afterwards. So we didn't go to the funeral, right? It's your kid did this, right? He's going along with what his mom is coaching him to do. So we are not going to get in the way of your brother being able to be around family. It's no. So I said, we'll just go ahead and come back down to Alabama and have time on the beach. So we had a timestamp picture from our first day back, which was the day of the viewing for the funeral or visitation or whatever. And we got a picture of the kid on the beach. So it was that kind of stuff. Or the GoFundMe thing that we discovered she had set up to try to get money for legal shit and where she was actively saying that, the kid's dad and brother did all these horrible things and nobody would believe her and blah, blah, blah. And, so it's all right, keep giving it to us, right? So I had this flash drive that had all the shit on it. And I got that to the attorney. And then the days of the court hearing, right? There was 3 days of it. And the first day, I got to be the first person on the stand. Never had to do that before. And I was on the stand for 4 hours because I knew this case so well, right? And then the only other person that was anywhere close to that, and it was actually over, was the kid's mom. And she was on the stand for 7 hours because they kept showing how she was lying. And, when they would have something and then, they'd go to their recess or whatever and we'd be talking about it in the hallway, I could be like, hey, we have something for this, so I could run back over to the office and have his secretary print it out and take it back and have it there for the freaking hearing to resume, right? So it's I did that. Months and months of worrying about this, and every single day he came home from work, he was like, what'd you do today? Nothing. So it was this constant devaluing my time and energy anyway. And, I think that was one of the biggest things that stood out to me was after we went through this whole court hearing shit. I was downtown with his mom and dad and him at one point. I don't think my dad went every day. He did go, I think, at least one day for the hearing, but it was waiting out in the lobby area because they couldn't, only the person on the stand and then, the parents and my former in-laws were able to be in the room because there was the chance that they were under consideration for having temporary custody, right? So it was just all this, this shit, right? And anyway, so for whatever reason, I end up downtown with his mom and his dad and him, and we're talking about it. And I don't even know what I said exactly. And he just flat out says, "You knew what you were getting into. You chose to deal with this." It's like, I chose I chose to help his brother. I did. It's like I saw that his brother had no way of getting out of that otherwise, right? Because I was the one that organized the shit, right? He was not even remotely appreciative of how much time and energy I had spent on it. And his mom and dad could appreciate that. But whatever it was, like, I don't remember exactly how he worded it. But I was just like, I see you. It's like, this I will not forget. Right? It's one of those things. And I think just looking at his mom's expression when he said whatever it was, like, she could kind of tell that was a sensitive spot. Right? And that was probably something he might not have should have said if he wanted to actually keep the relationship, which, as I've said many times, that was the purpose I served in that relationship. Was he needed somebody to deal with his battles, and I got to deal with it. But not for his sake. Anyway, so I left in December 2017. Now, the court hearing stuff was January 2018. Was it January? January, I think it was like 3 spread out days over January through April. We were wrapped up with it, but I don't know what of it was actually, like, the days weren't right in a row. But every day that there was court, I had to be there. And I had left at the start of December 2017, and then I had every intention of leaving him at that point, but I felt bad because it seemed like that would make him look bad if I ducked out in the middle of this custody case shit. So I prolonged it because the bigger reason I think that I prolonged it was because my mom told me that I couldn't bring Gidget and Taz back with me because she was watching Gracie during the day. Excuse me, and she didn't know those 2 dogs, so she didn't want them around the kid. But there was an element of it where I felt bad at the possibility of screwing up the case by leaving the situation before it was over. But mainly for the biggest thing was, like I said, I was there for his brother and his kid to show to help his brother and to show the kid that he did not have to be forever doomed to be like his shitty parents. But yeah, that ended up being the trial run, if you will, because it was still that point of proving to myself that it wasn't just my parents hating him that was my motivation for leaving, right? But then when I went back in August 2018, which was after a couple weeks after Tyler died, and of course Tyler's death was the thing that I started writing him letters and unpacking some of the baggage that I'd carried all my early years. And then, once I started unpacking it and basically setting it down, stopping the carrying it all the time, unnecessarily, that was what freed me up to be able to start making choices for myself and for my own good. But there again, when I went back, I took all my shit back because we both had to believe that it was the real thing. And like the real last hurrah. He didn't know, I think that he probably knew at some level that was the last go round. But I saw movement, and it looks like there's a little kid standing inside the door of this elementary school, but there's nobody out here. And I know they've had like sports equipment in there, so it's probably just the little sports equipment stuff, but it looks like a little kid. And I thought it was moving a minute ago. So anyway, right. So I had to believe that it was making a genuine attempt. And so I took all my shit back. But I was a lot more limited on how much I was communicating with my family because I did not want them being the thing where now I don't know if it's them or him or me or how I'm making this decision again, right? There were several times I tried to leave because it was not a situation I was meant to be in, but then at the same time, I felt stuck and had to find my way out of it, and that was a whole ordeal in and of itself. But yeah, like just to find out when I get back, when I'm trying to unpack how I ended up stuck in that situation or feeling like I was so stuck in that situation, and it comes back to my family, right? So it's like everything that like all the things that I second guessed myself on the connection about, or like, when I was thinking I need to get out of this is unhealthy. And then, then I would hear my parents say something, and then he would say I was only going along with it because they hated him. Then it's like, I don't know anymore. Right. So it's a matter of figuring out for myself, and like, especially as I've unpacked it more and more, realizing that my parents are just as bad. But yeah, like going back to the deal with my brother, and what I was thinking about this morning, it's like, because he's chosen his wife and to try to have a life with her and their daughter, he got demonized by the family on that point, right? So, they want to call him pussy whipped or whatever because he lets her have an opinion, because he listens to what she has to say. And that whole thing, that just pisses me off. Like, the more that I think about it now too, it's like, because he is trying to have a family of his own, and they're talking shit about her specifically because he wasn't supposed to have his own life either. And of course it came up again today. I spent I spent a bunch of the day with my mom again because I took her to her doctor's appointment, that 10:30 doctor's appointment. She calls at 10:15 and they say to be there at 11:30 because he's running a little bit behind, because that's how her doctor is always. She was not done until 3:00 today. So I sat in the car all that time. I did some thinking, did some writing, texted my brother for a little bit. But like that was the big thing. Like when I started this morning, it's like thinking about how much shit he's gotten from the family because he chooses to stay with his wife, right? Whereas I ultimately, while my grandfather was saying that his family doesn't get divorced and all that shit, I knew when I was little that I was going to be the person that had to get a divorce because of this thing that he kept saying, right? And it's like, I have to go through this situation and to unpack it basically and figure out, what causes somebody to get into a toxic relationship that they feel like they can't get out of. Well, got in a toxic relationship, had a really hard time getting out of it, had a really hard time believing myself once I did get out of it, that it wasn't just my family that was, trash talking him that got me out of it. And then, being made to second guess myself because I realized that I've been gaslighted my whole fucking life, right? Like, I was never supposed to have a life. I was raised to keep the family's illusion alive and to allow the toxic energy vampires to suck the life out of me, right? But, okay, so another thing I was thinking about was, like, with my brother, he's always, okay, when I was in high school, I remember being really protective of the good guys. It's like, okay, what does that mean? And so what I thought of it at the time was, and still, was the guys that try to do their own thing, try to be good, are just trying to live their own fucking lives, and yet somehow they keep getting dumped on by the world, right? So my brother, as an example, right? So, he got bullied in school some too, and he got bullied partly because of me too. Because of that bullshit from my cousin when my mom was babysitting, and the guy that was one of my biggest bullies was also one of my brother's biggest bullies. And unfortunately, they had been best friends before that, right? But that was the kid whose dad didn't want anything to do with him, so, he's going to make everybody else's his problem everybody else's problem, kind of a thing. So yeah. So I was always protective of the good guys. And then, I was thinking about that point this morning. It's like, this is exactly what's going on in the world. It's like the bullies are the ones that, have ultimately kept the rest of us in some sort of subservience and not able to believe that we're able to do anything worthwhile because we get bullied every time we try to fucking exist, man. But like the system is set up just like with my family, so my brother was actively shat upon. They talk shit about him because he chooses to have a life with his wife. They have a better relationship than my parents by all means, but it was kind of in spite of the family system, right? So the family system didn't want us to have our own lives, and so since my brother's choosing to have his own life rather than having the divorce situation like I had, to bring him back to the family. Of course, part of that was my dad told him at one point he and his wife were fighting a lot, and my dad said something about there's no honor in divorce or something, and he took that shit he took that to heart, right? And so where that, like, my dad never said anything like that to me, and my mom was of the mindset that with my ex and how toxic that was, that they had to get me out of there and all that. So of course they were swooping in to be the hero, right? But my brother would have had to walk away. But it's like, that's exactly the thing, right? So we exist in this space where the system doesn't want us to be able to do whatever we want. We're not supposed to have our own lives. We're not supposed to have an existence that doesn't cater to the fucking toxic system, right? So we have to pay all this ridiculous amount in taxes, and yeah, look at how the government's pissing it away, right? The government's shut down. There's some of them are still getting paid, right? But like, not like the assholes that are keeping it shut down. They're not having any issues. They don't have any struggles to pay bills or anything because they're fucking rich anyway, right? So yeah. So where is the urgency on their part to get it back up and running? There's not, because they're still getting money, right? Whereas the rest of us might not be able to pay bills or feed their families or anything like that, but they don't fucking care, because the system, the system benefits from them slaving away for nothing, right? Which is, it's like, oh God, it's a direct correlation with the shit with my family, right? So it's like everything that I'm seeing, it's like I see it at this personal level, but then I'm also seeing it play out at a bigger level. Like, okay, I've talked on here a lot about how my brother and I were raised to think that if you had secrets, it meant you were lying about, or you were hiding something. And that meant you were doing something wrong. But that's also how the system works, right? So if you are, trying to have any kind of existence that you're not keeping, you're not filling the government in on what you're doing, or you have money coming in that they don't know of, they're going to find a way to get to you one way or another, right? You're not supposed to have an existence that they're not in the middle of, that they're not raping you one way or another in your existence of, right? Fucking toxic nightmare. Yeah. I don't know, just watching it kind of play out and trying to sort through these different levels and see it at this personal level where it's small in the family and you didn't think it was so bad because maybe nobody in the immediate family, the whole system is about gaslighting, and it starts at the family level. And there are, okay, with narcissistic abuse, there are levels where it is a cultural thing, and okay, groups that are already squashed by the bigger group that's in charge further squashes amongst themselves to have some sort of superior role. So the misogynistic viewpoint of my father, right? Him squashing me because of me trying to do anything that's not approved of by his situation or whatever. I exist to take care of the old people, or to take care of their shit. That's the more irritating part about it too, is the level at which he fed into the system. He worked the job, paid the taxes, kept the food on the table for the family, but did not do jack shit for the emotional wellness of the family, right? So because he served the purpose, these very basic needs, we're supposed to stop everything and make him and keeping him around longer our focus because he kept us fed. But it's there's so much more to being a well-rounded, whole human being than just having this or that basic need met. And I've talked on here a lot too, going back to that twin flame thing. When I encountered his energy, the first thing I was aware of was how incredibly unsafe I felt in my body. Right? And it was, how do we unpack that? Well, there was a lot to unpack with that, but it all goes back to the stuff with how that Dobson asshat who came out in the 70s and 80s talking about children as tyrants and basically setting it up so families were actively abusing their children because otherwise their children were, essentially of the devil, and, going, if the children had any needs that, if the children cried, that was them trying to have control of the parent, right? So, I don't remember being in the crib and crying. I know I have heard many times that my mom and dad would go out on the back porch while I was crying in the crib to try to make me self-soothe as they were guided through all these bad teachings to do, right? But then ultimately what ends up happening is you take on this idea of nobody's coming, it's not safe. Do that again. And you're too much, right? So it's like, going back to that whole thing, it's like that's literally been the thing I've struggled with the most in my lifetime is I'm too much. And basically finding ways to push people back who might actually have been able to have a worthwhile influence other than the shit that I was given anyway, right? But instead I just end up with this fucking worthiness wound and, abandonment wound. So, and there again, I've talked a lot on here too about, I feel like that's kind of one of those things generationally, we're here to address that specifically. So there is a reason the system is so damn toxic, but it ultimately comes down to this family level that is already toxic because the system has trained it to be toxic to keep anybody from finding their way into an existence where the system isn't in charge. I think. Anyway, it's getting dark. I'm gonna say that over there is not actually a kid. It looks like a little kid with brown hair, wearing like a blue jacket with white stripes, which there might be a jacket right there. Maybe somebody left it outside at recess or something, which this isn't where the playground is, but I know this is where like the first grade. So they might bring their shit over here, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, there are doors on this side for where they go in of a morning. But yeah. Anyway, kind of tired of looking at that, seeing that little kid. Honestly, I think part of it is because I have the movie The Omen on my dresser. It's like, I don't know how many movies there are on that bunch, but I know it's a multi-disc set. So I think there were like 4 of them in the set that I got. So that's probably part of why I keep seeing it as a little kid, because I keep seeing that DVD thing on my... That's actually on my bookcase from that movie. But anyway, 2. I'm going to wrap it up. Yeah, as always, I appreciate you. Until the next time, see ya.